you can be on the wrong end of the spectrum of human beings, whereby even if you are the most sinful, and if you start worshipping me, he says, with devotion to none else, single pointedness, then that person should indeed be regarded as righteous, for he has rightly resolved. So, in other words, that he doesn't leave the door closed to anybody, any category of people, anybody. He says you can be from any kind of background, any kind of makeup in terms of your individual character. Doesn't matter whether it is by birth or whether it is by conditioning. Whatever the condition of you as a human being is, the spiritual path is available to you, which is kind of very optimistic way of looking at the availability of the spiritual path to everybody. In other words, there's nobody who is going to be barred from this spiritual path. And also, it indicates another thing, that perfection is possible right from the most extreme state or condition. In other words, you can be in any kind of state, whether by nature or by nurture, and you can still attain this perfection through following this spiritual path. And he says, but the only thing which he then gives a condition, of course, is that it should be devotion to none else, single-pointedness devotion, single-pointed devotion, which is continuously being practiced. And this continuation in terms of moment-to-moment practice results in even the transformation of what you call the most sinful, like he calls it here, durachar. Durachar means that the person who is a wicked person in this translation, but really speaking, it means somebody who has not even thought about God, somebody who even has not contemplated on walking on the path, somebody who is outside this realm of spiritual life. That person is able to step on, and with a single point of devotion, he or she is able to then attain this state of righteousness, which he calls dharmatma. In number 31, he says this becomes a dharmatma. And like we are saying, dharmatma has got actually two ways of looking at it. One is that there is a complete acknowledgement of one's own divine nature. Okay? Dharmatma, in this sense, he becomes righteous, becomes a dharmatma in the sense of, number one, recognition of one's own divine nature. Before, there was no recognition. There was no idea that, this, what is divinity, what it means to have this idea that you are divine by nature. That was not there. So, first of all, the recognition of the inner divinity which is there, and secondly, a manifestation of that divine nature in our day-to-day transactional life. So, in acknowledging that one is divine and then manifesting that divinity in daily transaction, this is what a dharmatma is. And we may say that, okay, this now actually applies to this and perhaps does not apply to me because I already recognize that there is an even inner divinity within myself, and that it needs to be manifested in my transactional life. The question is, to what extent are we still, believing, truly believing? Because true belief is something else than just believing intellectually. Okay? True belief means that you have this unflinching faith that there is this inner divinity which is going to be expressed in my day-to-day life. So this firm faith of one's own inner divine nature, one has to examine that to what extent do I really have this faith that I'm divine by my own inner essential nature. And secondly, to what extent is this divinity expressing itself in my transactional life as a life of dharma? Okay. So these two questions are important for everyone. It doesn't mean that only um, the, the the most wicked, as is putting it here, or the sinners have to think about that. It is everybody's kind of question to ask as to what extent is this in my own life, and also in the sense that in terms of my spiritual practice, or to what extent is there this single pointed devotion. Single pointed devotion, we have talked about it many times in the past 8 chapters, including this one. Single pointed devotion means that there is a clear focus in your life. And the clear focus in your life is that this life is about spirituality and nothing else. And everything is seen in relationship to this spiritual focus. Okay, this is what is meant by single pointed devotion. The narrow definition is that I keep on thinking about God through every moment of my waking day. But the wider definition is that the whole of my life is oriented towards spirituality. The whole of my concept of life is about achieving this purpose of single pointed devotion, that my life becomes God oriented and nothing else. Okay, nothing else means that everything is seen in the context of this divine purpose, this purpose which is unfolding this divinity within myself, and nothing else. So this single pointed devotion and its application, which develops the concentration, and this results in the purification of the mind, he says, and that this person soon becomes a Dharmatma and attains eternal peace. And we saw also what this eternal peace is. It's not a peace which arises out of just, a kind of agitation which has stopped for a while, but a peace which comes from recognition of one's own inner divinity. And this firm resolve which is made, he says, is really something which is, again, applies to everybody, including you and me, is to see what is the intensity and what is the nature of my own resolve in terms of treading this path, in terms of trying to reach the goal. Yeah. So this firm resolve is what is required, and it says that there is no failure for a person of this kind of firm resolve. And then in 32 he goes on to talk about the other part of it, which we already mentioned, is the nature and the nurture. So he says this Papa Yoneyaha, which is of a sinful birth, really means that we are talking not about specific um, categories of people which are mentioned here, women, Vaishyaha, and he says Sudraha. These are people who are really characterized by some kind of inner nature which has taken them away completely from their own understanding of the divine nature, and also to kind of put them in a place whereby they are not functioning according to this knowledge, this highest knowledge, and therefore, even those people who have been born in that kind of condition are also able to access the spiritual path. And it says, if they taking refuge in me, they also attain the supreme goal. So, I mean, it's clear from this last three verses that although he was talking about the Mahatmas and the Buddhas before, earlier on, he is not barring the Buddhas by saying, okay, these people cannot ever attain the supreme goal. It means that, yes, it is possible for these people to actually attain the supreme goal once they become single-pointed and there is a firm resolve that I want to go on this path and I'm going to stay on this path. And with that kind of firm resolve, one then becomes from a Buddha, one becomes a Dharmatma. So that is a complete transformation. This complete transformation is possible with this kind of firm resolve and this kind of intention, which is single-pointed devotion towards the highest.
Why is workers in there?
So workers, if we see that he has defined Striyaha as the feminine mind, which means that this kind of deep affection and blinding attachment. Then the Vaishyas were calculating mind, and then he says the Sudras are the ones who have this mental attitude of slumber and slothfulness.
Oh, okay, so it's not workers like
not
laborers.
No, not laborer. Because you can even be a prime minister and you can be a Sudra. You see what I mean? In the internal characteristic of a person, which is primarily based on laziness, a kind of ignorance, slothfulness, not kind of getting engaged with life in this positive way, staying back as if it is a dull state of the mind.
Okay.
And there is a lot of inertia. So the tamasic mind is the Sudra. The Vaishya is the Rajasic plus the Tamasic. The Kshatriya is the Rajasic plus the Sattvic, and the Brahmin is the one which is a Sattvic nature. So these four categories are either the gunas by themselves, like the Brahmins are the Sattvic nature, and the Sudras are the Tamasic. In between, you got a combination of these two. So Sattvic plus Rajasic is the Kshatriya. Rajasic plus the Tamasic is the Vaishya, and the Sudra is the one which is completely in the Tamasic way. So normally we find that majority of the people fall within the Vaishya class, in the sense that a lot of rajas is there in terms of I want to do this, that in the world. A bit of tamas is there, but the people who are belonging to any of these three categories, which is mentioned here, he says they can also, if they make a firm resolve and start going on this pathway, they can reach the ultimate goal. So even from the state of slothfulness, inertia, you can get out of that through the activity which will take place. In other words, the tamasic nature can be activated through the injection of some kind of rajasic energy, and with that rajasic energy, the whole kind of wheel starts turning, and then once you start going on that pathway, eventually, of course, the goal is going to be reached. Okay, so what he's saying, what Gurudev is saying, the prescription is, of course, sadhana for all these things, and of all the spiritual practices, he says the constant remembrance of the Lord is the most efficient in terms of getting out of this, out of these kind of states of being, the states of character. One can arise out of that through this sadhana into complete perfection. That, he says, is absolutely possible. So the 33 is a complementary kind of statement to what he has been saying earlier, and he says now he describes the fourth part of this, the four kind of different characters which are there in human beings. He says that what about the brahmanas? He says it becomes much more easier for them to get onto the path. So let's chant number 33 now.
Kim punah brahmana punyaha bhakta rajarshayastata anityam asukam lokam imam prapya bhajasva mam. Together. Kim punar brahmana punyaha bhakta rajarshayasata anityam asukam lokam imam prapya bhajasva mam.
Okay, so the last three verses, as you said, is that it describes the stages by which one can arise out of this kind of state of either sloths or whatever, the three kind of characteristics which is mentioned here. And then he says that, you rise up into the supreme goal through this tremendous effort and having that pure intention, single pointedness, one arises. Even if there is a lot of inertia, you can do that. But in this case, how much more easily then the holy brahmanas and the devoted royal saints attain the goal. Having obtained this impermanent and joyless world, you do worship me devotedly. So, attainment of the goal, again, is in relationship to the level of ignorance, okay? And attainment of the goal in relationship to the experiences which one has gone through. So these two are important in terms of understanding what Lord Krishna is saying here, that one is able to start moving on to the path in any condition which one finds oneself in. Okay, so there's no excuse, in other words, to say, actually, I'm not meant for this path, this spirituality doesn't kind of look as if it is possible for me, etc., etc. There is no excuse, even when you are in those three categories mentioned earlier, or even if it says the holy Brahmana or the Raja Rishi. Now, Raja Rishi is the one who is called a royal saint. And who is this Raja Rishi who says, a king who, having enjoyed intelligently his power and wealth in his complete satiation, arising out of growing discrimination when it comes to experience the inward peace of true contemplation upon the self. This is called a Raja Rishi. Okay. And there are many examples of Raja Rishis in the scriptures. And of course, Lord Krishna himself has mentioned one. Do you remember who it was?
Janaka.
Janak, that's right. Janak Maharaj was mentioned that, he was in a state of realization, and even in that state of realization, he's ruling a whole kingdom. So the wealth is there, the power is there, even with those, he says, with the growing discrimination, with this single pointedness, he comes to experiences in a peace of true contemplation upon the self. This is the Rajarishi. Yeah. So, in this sense, the what you call the king is what? What category does it belong to? Out of the four. Kshatriya. Okay, so the king is a Kshatriya. So now he has included all the four categories, right? And he says now any of these four categories, the Brahmana, who is a sattvic nature, the Kshatriya, the Raja Rishi, he is a leader. Kshatriyas are the leaders. They are the people who have the ability to lead, whether it is a family or a group or a people or a whole community or a whole nation or a whole world. These are the Kshatriyas. Right? It is the quality of leadership which is present in the Kshatriyas, and they are the ones who are characterized by these two gunas, the guna of sattva and the guna of rajas. Rajas is in the majority. The sattva guna is available as a proportion of those gunas, and because the sattva is there, the rajasic energy is going to be turned towards what? Towards the sattvic. Whereas in the Vaishya, the rajasic energy is there, but it is what? A tamasic element instead of a sattvic. So the rajasic energy turns towards the tamasic way of looking at life, which is that it becomes a barter system. It becomes like I want this and I want that and I'm going to get it. Right? So you can see the difference is that because that the sattvic element is there in the Kshatriya, he will turn all his actions towards the higher, towards the more nobler, towards a kind of a life which is governed by higher values rather than values which have to do with material life. So this is the Rajarishi. And then he says the Brahmins who are, in any case, sattvic in nature, he says the holy Brahmanas, they are able to go on the path much more easily because the sattvic element is there. Okay? Because the sattvic element actually pulls them towards this higher purpose, towards the higher meaning, and he says it's much easier for them to get out of any of these rajasic elements. And he says that they will attain this goal much more easily. Okay, so again, a question to ask ourselves, self-reflection, is where are we in terms of these four things, right? Four categories.
We're not talking about where you were born.
No, no,
It's
no,
by
no.
your actions.
By your inner nature. Inner nature means what? In other words, that what beliefs do I carry with myself? What kind of beliefs? If they are very tamasic beliefs, then I am tamasic by nature. Okay? It doesn't mean you can have a Brahmin who is acting in the world like a Shudra, or you can have a Brahmin who is acting like a Vaishya who is totally engaged in commercial world, has got no interest in spiritual life.
But generally, if you're a Brahmin lineage,
Generally, if there is a Brahmin lineage, the understanding is that because the great grandfather was, oriented towards spiritual things, that this will be transmitted somehow through the generations. But remember what Lord Krishna said earlier in chapter number, that this knowledge is lost over generations. It becomes diluted, right? Because of the pressures which are there, internal pressures and external pressures. It has become so diluted that now I have to come back into the world to give this knowledge again. So it means that this, although you can be born in a certain family, it doesn't mean that that nature is going to follow according to the kind of category in which you're born. It is more about what is your inner nature, right? And sometimes we find ourselves fighting um, uh, against the kind of lineage on the one hand in which you're born and your own inner nature. I mean, I personally had this huge problem about being born in a very much kind of commercial family, but knowing that that my inner nature was misaligned with that kind of thinking and that kind of doing in the world, and I struggled for many years with that. But of course, found a solution eventually as to how I'm going to manage both systems at the same time. But it can be quite an intense pressure in terms of what your inner calling is and what is the pressure from outside, right? And this is one of the other things about we as parents, how much pressure do we put on our children in terms of saying, no, you must become a doctor, you must become a lawyer, you must become an accountant, and those are the only three things which is available to you. I know this same thing happened to me as well, so I can understand how much pressure we can put on our children, because to recognize, the important thing here is to recognize your own inner nature. Where is your turn? What is the proportion of your gunas? And like I was saying, that there is a questionnaire which you can fill in, and you can find out exactly how much proportion of your gunas there is. Anybody who's interested, I'll send you it. So you can know exactly how much sattva there is, how much rajas there is, how much tamas.
So, Ramesh, since you raised this issue of parenting, putting the pressure on the children, and obviously I have kids, and I need to always balance between,
That's right.
Are they just being lazy and losing their way versus my pushing them into something that I think is the right word? I don't know the answer to that. And only exposed do I realize that their calling is different. Because for me, when I see something and they're just lazing around, not doing what they're supposed to do, whereas it could be that their calling was different and they just didn't express it to me. Where?
No, I think it's slightly more complex than that. I think you have to take into account the stage of development. Okay, because sometimes the stage of development does not indicate even to themselves what the inner nature is. That is obvious, isn't it? And then we as parents kind of try to recognize that this is what is the best in terms of the practicalities of today's life, right? This is our thinking, that you need to go into this kind of profession, or do this kind of thing, or you have to turn your mind towards this thing, and it may not naturally be occurring to them that this is what you've got to do. And again, the question is that, to what extent is this motivation, like you say, that, you're feeling lazy, you're not doing anything. Get up and start doing, get up and start doing, right? So, in other words, that Rajasic energy has not yet been activated according to the stage of development they are, because of the maybe the maturity of understanding is not there. These are all kind of factors we have to keep in mind, right? And trying to balance between, number one, their own inner nature. Number one, the number two, the state of development of the maturity or the stage at which they are. Number three, the outer circumstances and the practicalities of life. Number four, your own inner nature and how it is going to kind of feed into what they are doing, etc. It's a whole kind of complicated equation. But in the end, I think the important thing is to begin to recognize their own true nature, and to make sure that even what you are suggesting is in alignment to that, rather than something which is completely opposed to that, because then you're creating a situation where the tension is always going to be there.
So if their inner nature is tamasic, we shouldn't try and make it sattvic.
No, that's not what I mean. And therefore giving them the framework of the meaning and purpose, right? So it's all these things are come slowly. They don't come immediately to that. And sometimes it takes a long time. So we got to be patient and to kind direct and navigate, and letting them also learn to navigate between all these various different things. So it is part of our duty to actually turn them towards this kind of way, and also to kind of make them understand that there is a way in which these gunas have to be managed, right? Just like we learned that you can't afford to be tamasic when the exams are coming up, right? So this kind of learning has also to take place, and this is something which we need to train them to do as well. Is that how are you going to get up at 2 hours earlier because you've got an exam, and how are you going to manage this whole day because that tamasic energy is still there running in the background? How are you going to manage all that? This is a part of our parenting. It's training them how to manage all these things.
Can you only move to sattva through rajas?
Well, that is the normal condition. That's the normal condition. Is that the journey would be, if one is tamasic, then what is the prescription for a tamasic person, right? Prescription for a tamasic person is to get them going. In other words, to give them some rajasic activity to do, and although it is kind of may not be something which they are used to, but they start getting used to doing some things in their life in a systematic, methodical way, so that the rajasic energy begins to develop. Once the rajasic energy begins to develop, then you kind of redirect that rajasic energies from the lower to the higher, right? And that means that the sattvic element is now beginning to develop. And then a complete turning towards the sattvic takes place at a later stage. But certainly it is possible to do that. And it is also doesn't mean that it's going to take you a lifetime to do that. It means that within a short time, it is possible to start converting this rajasic energy into the tamasic into rajasic, and rajasic into sattvic.
The people in prisons, for example,
yes.
they've got no room to be rajasic.
Yes.
So, and you hear of them having a turnaround.
Yes,
becoming
that's
saints.
right. That's right. So I mean, again, it goes to kind of understanding is that what is the purpose of a prison? Where does this culture of imprisoning people come from? It is based on a certain understanding of human nature, right? And this understanding of human nature, which says that if this person, Rajasic energy is being kind of misused in some way, and therefore it is taking them towards a criminal kind of way of living, the best thing is to restrict that Rajasic energy by imprisoning that Rajasic energy. You see what I mean? So the fundamental kind of understanding of imprisoning is embedded in this idea of human nature. It comes from that understanding. Now, according to us, that is not the right way, right? According to Vedanta, the right way is to redirect that Rajasic energy into different way rather than imprisoning that energy. See what I mean?
But that's where rehabilitation comes in, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
The later concepts
exactly.
of punishment.
That's
is
right.
Not
That's
to,
right.
to just punish
That's right.
and keep away from society,
That's
but
right.
to rehabilitate.
But to rehabilitate.
Yeah.
And this is really about, redirecting the Rajasic energies into the right way. This is what rehabilitation is all about, isn't it? So the emphasis is more on rehabilitation and less on imprisoning, right, that energy. But then again, there's so many, it's not a simple equation as that. There's a lot of other things. But yeah, but certainly, there is a kind of pathway of development which is there. And the important thing is to recognize that there is a difference in nature. There's a difference in the internal kind of construction of nature. According to the gunas, we have to recognize where we are. We have to make use of the energies which is available to us at the moment and see how we can begin to change the proportions of those energies through various different activities which are also contained in the Bhagavad Gita, because Bhagavad Gita takes all different positions, all different stages, all different kind of inner characteristics and says, here is your pathway. Here's what you have to do. Here's, if you're starting off, this is the pathway. If you're in the middle of your spiritual journey, this is what you need to do. It is a complete roadmap of all types of human beings to reach the highest goal. Okay? And this is something which all the themes in the Bhagavad Gita actually lead us towards.
So in verse 30,
yeah,
when we're talking about, when Krishna is talking about the most simple worshippers, and that they can be regarded as righteous, but for somebody who is a non-believer to become a believer, that's a journey. So can we understand that verse to mean that he's kind of condensed that journey into that single verse? He's not talking about somebody who's just been transformed, because somebody's not going to just wake up one morning.
That's right. That's right. So this is kind of very shortened way of putting it, and like Gurudev is saying here, this is the evolution of the individual is being mapped out and showing the various stages through which it is going through. But of course, stepping on from the non-belief to the belief, that is another stage in itself. Is that how is that going to happen? That you suppose you say somebody doesn't believe in God at all, and is not interested in any of this kind of spirituality. How is that person actually going to make a transition from that kind of stage to start believing in God? Right? That is a big journey in itself, and it could happen in many different ways, right? It could mean that a chance meeting with somebody, or a chance hearing something, and then the interest begins to develop, and whether then it becomes this four type of devotee, starting with the level of trying to say that, okay, the limits of my own kind of potentiality in terms of what I can do and what I cannot do, recognizing that I can't achieve this on my own. I need something else to kind of help me to do that. And here's something which can help me. So God becomes like your helper, who's going to help you to get what you want. Even starting at that basic stage, then one begins to kind of rise into becoming a vijnani. But it could mean that this kind of conversion, as it were, from a non-belief to a belief is an important step of it, because before you even step where he's talking about, that conversion needs to take place. And sometimes that can happen in different ways.
Okay. Is it possible that our inner nature will always, at some stage in our life, will pull towards spirituality, irrespective of our upbringing or whatever ups and downs of life?
Yeah, I mean, one can say that, um, and this is another kind of principle which is often mentioned also in other scriptures, is that there is a kind of evolution of every human being which is taking place in any case, whether you're on the spiritual path or not on the spiritual path. But this journey is going to take hundreds of lifetimes, even thousands of lifetimes, for it to come to the stage whereby the proportion of sattva is now coming to a certain, proportion, which is then going to trigger off this interest in spiritual life. So whether it is going to happen in this lifetime or next lifetime or the lifetime after that or 100 lifetimes after that, it is something which is going to happen. So think about this cycle of creation itself. Okay, if you go take the biggest kind of widest context in which this can happen. So from Satyug, you see that Satyug, then Dwapar Yug, Treta Yug, and then Kali Yug. So you can see steady deterioration from a complete sattvic energy to a kind of tamasic energy which is now coming about. Okay. But then there is a transition from the Kali Yug into the Sattvic, into the Sattvic. So now, how is that going to happen? Unless there is some kind of evolution which is taking place, or some kind of cycle which is continuing in this kind of manner, there will always be some time when human beings begin to wake up to this spiritual reality. So there is going to be a time. Now, when it is going to happen, how it is going to happen again, it depends on the individual, because as far as a small proportion of human beings living on this earth at this moment, for them it is their own space which is subdued. So they are living in a subdued because they already elevated themselves into that kind of space. But majority of proportion of people, tamasic and rajasic, but that will eventually kind of evolve into everybody, the proportion of sattva becoming more and more and more and more. When that is going to happen, that's another several 100,000 years before it can start happening. But it will happen one time or the other.
It was interesting. This blog I was reading about is one Singaporean person. He's from a Buddhist background, and his family. I mean, he said in Singapore or in Oriental culture, that money is everything, position is everything, power, position, money is all. He said we've been kind of from our childhood, parents, push us that you have to become this, you have to have this, you have to. And he said all these things happened in my life, and he achieved everything. He, high position, a lot of earning, a lot of money, and everything. And then at one stage, he just asked this question to himself. He was on holiday. He asked this question: "What's the purpose of my life?" And that became a turning point.
Yeah.
He left his job, and then he went on his inner journey.
That's right. So, the question is whether that is the moment at which, the sattva guna attained a certain proportion, or it was already there, but because it was covered up with all this rajasic energy which has been there, due to the culture, due to the condition in which he was born, to the family in which he was born, and then all of a sudden it kind of comes up at that stage whereby he asks this question. Right? So it means that at that stage now, that guna is expressing itself, so that he is now aware of another purpose altogether, and is taking his mind to that. So it can happen anytime, as I said. Okay, so
very interesting.
Yeah.
He observed,
Yeah.
he said, the upbringing
Yeah.
of just pushing,
That's right.
child, into just thinking
That's right.
money is everything,
That's
power
right.
is everything.
That's right.
And he said, I became so efficient in doing
Yes.
everything what I was doing,
Yes.
that when this question came of what is the purpose of my life,
Mm.
so I was able to pull that upbringing,
Yeah.
the kind of methodical
into the
you know,
spiritual life.
in spiritually,
That's right.
and it
that,
really opened the complete door.
and the efficient methodical way of doing things is nothing but the sattvic energy. Right? So that sattvic energy was there in the first place, but it was directing the rajasic energies into the rajasic mode of functioning. As soon as you take that away, that rajasic energy then turns towards the sattvic. You see what I mean? So that the same means are being employed to take him towards a different destination. So it is this, and this is what I was mentioning earlier, that sometimes, we impose our own energies onto other people around us, which may not be the most appropriate thing to do. Anyway, so coming back to these brahmanas and the royal saints, these are the different, again, the inner characteristics, which is, it is easier for these kind of people with this kind of nature. It is much easier to turn towards God. Okay? And those of us who are sitting around here, already have a good proportion of sattva, which means that for us it will be at this stage, it will be much easier for us to kind of obtain this. And he says, having obtained this impermanent and joyless world, you do worship me devotedly. Now again, what does it mean when he says you attain this impermanent and joyless world, right? So, pointing out that, we take this reality as reality in the sense that we think that, okay, joy is going to be there, and, we can hang on to things and make them permanent by hanging on to things. But he says, he's pointing out the reality of life. In other words, that, this life is joyless in the absolute sense. It is impermanent, again, from the absolute point of view, and then recognizing that this impermanence and this joylessness which is arising in our day-to-day transactional life, one can actually go beyond this this kind of life which we have got used to and which we have taken for granted, to something which is permanent and something which is ever joyful. Okay? So this joyless and impermanent world is what we are experiencing now. And it says, finding ourselves here, what are we going to do? Having found ourselves here in this joyless and impermanent world, he says that think about it and then say to yourself, is this really what I want in my life? This joylessness and impermanence. I want to get something, just like you were saying, this person asked the question, is this only what is there in life? And then having asked this question, he says that turn your devotion towards me. In other words, that turn your attention towards this higher purpose. Think about the purpose of life. Think about the meaning of life. Think about how we are living our life according to the values which we have kind of explicitly understood in our decisions and our transactions in life. How do we actually turn this towards the higher? This is having understood that this is an impermanent, joyless world, and finding ourselves here doesn't mean that we have to remain here. There is still an option of getting out of this impermanent and joyless world. So here, this condition, like what Gurudev is saying, the term loka is the world of experiences. And this world of experiences, he says that is really something which we are experiencing now. And it is got these two features. One is this joylessness, and the other one is transiency. Okay? So remember the 5 lessons of life which I told you, 2 of them are indicated by Lord Krishna here. So these two things, joylessness and transiency, he says, is really something which can be overturned and can go into a completely different kind of direction when we recognize that there is the way in which we can turn towards the self, and with this spiritual activity, the sadhana, the worship towards the Lord, towards the self, we can escape from this impermanence and joylessness. So that brings us to the last verse in this chapter. We still got about 10 minutes, so which we can just go through this last verse, and then of course it was suggested that we kind of summarize not only this chapter but all the chapters what we have done so far, so that we can see. Sometimes it's not easy to see when you're reading verse by verse. It's not easy to see the map which Lord Krishna has so beautifully kind of pointed out to us. And so far, we have gone from the first 6 chapters, which were talking about the individual and the nature of the individual, the human condition, as it were. The first 6 chapters is about the human condition. The next 6 chapters about the absolute self, and the last 6 chapters are about the relationship between these two and how this can be expressed more and more in our lives. So within that broad framework of the Bhagavad Gita, we can begin to understand the various linkages which he has provided, the various steps and the stages through which one has to go through in order to attain the highest goal, how these are all connected together in terms of the whole philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. Sometimes it's good to kind of summarize all these things so that the picture becomes clear in our mind. So we can do that sometimes. Durai was suggesting maybe we can take a couple of hours on a Sunday morning, get a room at the Hero Art Center, and we can kind of advertise so that people who are interested in, they can also join us. And a couple of hours is enough to kind of bring us to understand this beautiful picture that Lord Krishna has drawn, and to also have a bit of question-answer session as well. Is that to somebody?
Yes.
Sounds good. Yeah. Okay, good. So we'll have that. Anyway, we'll have to decide when to have it.
Should be part of the Gita Jayanti, these things.
Yeah.
Should be part of the Gita Jayanti day.
It should
just
be
not chanting alone, but chant it and then summarize the meanings of it in a meaningful way.
That's right. I think the preamble or a postamble, as it were, to the Gita Jayanti should be a kind of workshop on the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah. Maybe you can suggest it to
we have, I think.
Yeah.
Before the chanting.
Before the chanting.
So you understand the chanting better.
That gives meaning to the chanting. But they do the audios, don't they?
Yeah,
It's
they
just
do
2 minutes summary.
2 minutes
It's
summary.
not enough.
That's 2 minutes summary, which gives a kind of snapshot.
But anyway, there are plans for the Gita Jayanti day to become a full day affair, in which case
the question also is concentration, because the mind only concentrates up to a point.
Yeah.
So it could be the danger something being lost.
So give nice breaks. It will be with breaks and all, do it through. But it's a full day of spiritual living. It's a full day of spiritual living.
Don't worry, Thomas will be taken care of.
One day we will give up our Rajas Guna and spend it satvically.
Couldn't it be the week before, the Sunday before?
Yeah, it can be. So this is what Shiva is saying, that it doesn't have to be a whole kind of day. It could be the previous Sunday we could have this kind of workshop, and then the following Sunday is the chanting, and then the following one we can have something else as well. So Gita Jayanti can be done in different ways. Okay, so let's go to the last one, which is then like Gurudev is saying, is a beautiful summary of the entire chapter. And this, of course, is the royal secret. Remember this, he's been talking about the royal secret, the kind of what I call the hidden reality. Okay? This is the hidden reality which is not available because it is hidden. How to actually get under this hidden reality, and how are we going to, what is the method of doing it?
Manmana bhava madbhaktaha Matyaji mam namaskuru Mame vaishyasi yuktvevam
Mame Vaishyasi Yukvevam
Atmanam Matparayanaha.
Atmanam Matparayanaha
Together. Manmana Bhava Madbhaktaha Madhyaji Mam Namaskuru Mame Vaishyasi Yukvevam Atmanam Matparayanaha. We'll do the last one together. Om Tat Sat Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Raja Vidya Raja Guhya Yogo Nama Navamodhyaya.
So I will just kind of go through this briefly, and then we'll take it up next week as well, and then I will kind of give a brief summary of the whole chapter, and then we go on to number 10. So bring your number 10 chapter with you next time as well. So here he says, fix your mind on me, be devoted to me, sacrifice to me, bow down to me, having thus united your whole self to me, taking me as your supreme goal, you shall come to me. So he has described the goal, he has described the means, he has described, what is going to happen in this case, and he says that, all these things, if they are done in the way in which has been describing and prescribing to us, then it is absolutely possible that we will be able to attain this Brahma Vidya, which is the technique, like Gurudev is saying, the technique of self-development, self-perfection through the paths of right knowledge and meditation. This is what can actually get us to the goal. And here he is pointing out specific kind of practices, which he says that when the mind is filled with me, my devotees, all sacrifices, all salutation to me at all times, whatever the type of work one is engaged in, this is the means of evolution of the individual, the personal transformation which is going to take place. So we have discussed all these various elements of these practices in detail. Fix your mind on me. What does it mean? It means that the mind is single pointed in the way in which the attention is being pointed. The attention is always on the higher. Whatever is happening at the level of the body, mind, intellect, it is in relationship to this highest goal. It says, be devoted to me, which means the devotion, not only the head, but also the heart should flow towards that higher purpose. It says, be devoted to me, sacrifice to me, which means that, this kind of constant sacrifice of the fruit of the action, the senses, the mind, the intellect, everything is kind of sacrificed into this fire of knowledge. And he says that bow down to me, in other words, that, recognize that this is really the ultimate purpose and the ultimate goal, and that this needs to be acknowledged and to be bowed down to. In other words, that we have to sacrifice the biggest headache of all, which is what?
Ego.
Yes. So bowing down means that I'm now also surrendering my ego, and he says that having thus united your whole self, in other words, that having gone, transcended beyond the body, mind, intellect, united yourself to me, which means that, in this deepest, highest meditation, when we make this ultimate discrimination between the self and the not self, in other words, the pure consciousness and the awareness, and we have made this ultimate discrimination, we unite with the with the pure consciousness, and having united, taking me as a supreme goal, he says this is the ultimate goal of merger with the pure consciousness, Satchidanand Brahman, whatever name we give it, you shall come to me. Okay, so in other words, that he himself is saying, this is me as pure consciousness, pure existence, pure joy, And when you tread on this path with all these practices, you shall come to me. In other words, the realization of one's own true nature, the merger with the self takes place, and that is really the achieving the purpose of life. In other words, the life now becomes totally fulfilled, complete fulfillment of life by this merger which is going to take place. Okay, so I'll go into a bit more detail next time for this final 2 verses, and then we'll summarize and go on to chapter number 10. Om Sarve Bhavantu
Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukha Bhavet Hasato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om. So it's Dore's special day today.
Oh,
Oh, Narendra Bhai as well. Okay, happy birthday to you both. So we'll sing them the special song.
yeah.
It's our remembrance day for these people as well for everyone else. But let's sing the birthday song for them. Janmadinamidam ay priya sake santanotu te sarvatamudam prarthayamahe bhavashatayushi ईश्वर सदा त्वं च रक्षतु पुण्यकर्मणा कीर्तिमर्जया जीवनं तव भवतु सार्थकम् जन्मदिनमिदं ते प्रियसखे शन्तनोतु ते सर्वदा मुदम् सर्वदा मुदम्.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday. Is it